Welcome to 39-Minute Conversations. Please wait for your host to begin this meeting. Your meeting is now being recorded.
All right, take two. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, we did it.
It's going to be the 35-minute session.
Hopefully by starting the meeting over again, we'll still get our 40. But if not, some technical difficulties, that's all part of it. Before we get started, I want to get into it, but the first thing I do have to do is get through an ad read real quick. I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
This week's episode of 39-Minute Conversations is not technically presented by the Weather app. That's right, the Weather app on your iPhone or Android device, probably. Whatever phone you have, it probably has a weather app. I live in Los Angeles, and historically, I've never had to check the Weather app. It has sat largely unused on my home screen, but in other parts of the country, sure. You gotta know how many layers to put on, if you need an umbrella, be dealing with a blizzard or sleet or whatever. In LA, you didn't have to check the weather. You'd wake up in the morning, put on shorts and a t-shirt, 99% chance you'd be all right, because LA doesn't have weather. There are two seasons here, hot, not as hot. But lately, I don't know what's going on out there. It's madness. It's rainy. It's cold. There's snow in Pasadena. There's a tornado in Montebello. I have seen disaster movies. Snow and a tornado in Los Angeles is not a great sign. But hey, even if it's not the end of the world, I don't like it and I don't support it. We do not pay Los Angeles prices for Seattle weather, so LA, get it together. The Weather app. I guess we need it now. And hello, I'm Brian T. Arnold, and this is 39-Minute Conversations, a podcast about reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. But I've only got 39 minutes to do it because I will not be paying for Zoom Pro. My guest today has written over 30 movies and TV projects at almost every major studio and network. His screenwriting credits include K9, Alaska, and Trojan War. He's also the host of GoIntoTheStory.com, the official screenwriting blog of The Blacklist, and which was also named the best of the best scriptwriting website by Writer's Digest. He's the author of The Protagonist Journey, an introduction to character-driven screenwriting and storytelling, a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Not to mention, he's currently an assistant professor of screenwriting at DePaul University. Folks, please join me in welcoming Scott Myers.
Hey,
Scott.
Brian, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Sorry that the weather has been such a bad thing there. I told my kids when we left California and moved to the Midwest, I told them exactly the thing. I said, we're going someplace where we have something we didn't have in LA. And they said, what's that? And I said, weather. So
I've lived here for
anyhow.
11, 12 years, and it's weird. I've never seen this. But you know what? We're going to get through it. There are worse things in the world. And Scott, I do want to start with this. You were one of the first people, like outside of my circle, that kind of made me feel like a real writer in a way. By the time we met last year, I'd had some writing wins. I'd signed with my reps. I'd optioned a script, gotten the blacklist. But those things can kind of feel a little nebulous. They're hard to like explain to people outside the business and outward. Like you're kind of wondering how your life has changed and who's really noticing. And then you reach out. You've read my script. You want to interview me about it. And you were showing it. You were talking about it in your screenwriting class, and that made me feel a little bit more real, like I was actually in this world. So I just wanted to start by telling you how much I appreciate that and thank you for it.
Well, all the kudos to you. That making the blacklist is a pretty exclusive club. I think you're probably more likely to make the NBA than to get on the blacklist.
Not the way that I play basketball. If you have seen me play basketball, you would know that the NBA was never a real shot for me.
Yeah, but can LeBron James turn a classic sort of metaphor? I don't know. And can he hit a plot line point at the exact spot where it's supposed to land? Maybe.
I've seen Space Jam 2. I don't think he can, but he's good at so many other things. This podcast was born out of me locking down for the pandemic and still to this day, not being super comfortable doing a lot of in-person things, the comedy and performing that I used to do. So I do like to start these episodes with, how have the last few years been for you? How did you stay sane during it? How has this time changed you? What did you learn about yourself? Feel free on any of that.
So there was a band, a punk band called Blur. That's
Mhm.
pretty much it for me. It's been like 3 years, just a complete blur. And the question's still outstanding about the sanity issue. I it coincided with me writing the protagonist journey, like literally just as I was starting the process of breaking that book and writing it. That's when we went into lockdown mode.
Mhm.
And I have to say, that was really challenging because writing a book like that with like footnotes and all this analysis, and I'm it has over 300 movie and TV references,
Mhm.
and not just like it's a lot different than, oh, I'm sitting down with these characters in this laundromat and here's a scene, which
Mhm.
is just you feel your way through it. This was not that.
Mhm.
Plus, it was really a challenge. It's an academic book, but I wanted it to be readable. So
Mhm.
every line I slaved over. So during COVID, when like literally the first year we couldn't even go outside, I just slinked down to my basement office here in my house, in the winter of Chicago, the gray gloom, facing these pages like, how am I going to get through this, right?
Mhm.
But you know what? Having written so many scripts, I've sold over 30, but I've, written, I don't know, 40 plus. You learn persistence. You just learn to do it, even if it's just what you're writing you don't feel very strongly about. At least it's
Mhm.
something that's down there, and then you can rewrite it. So I think it really underscored for me the importance of that. Um, I have to say, I actually, I was teaching it through DePaul. We were teaching through Zoom,
Mhm.
in one of my MFA classes. I'm now starting my sixth MFA thesis class.
Wow.
This in the spring. I've done five. One of them, they never met in person. They
Mhm.
only met via Zoom. And yet they're one of the strongest groups of cohorts, like hanging out and still together and supporting each other. It's strange. So I don't really know what lessons I learned other than just persistence and that um, being a screenwriter, you have to be able to roll with the punches. And that was certainly that when we were just
Mhm.
doing all those Zoom meetings and everything else.
Let's
Crazy
start with
time.
it's crazy times. Let's start with the book. I was gonna work our way into it, but you've led us right in there. I'm down. Let's go ahead and start with talking about the book. It is, as I mentioned, the protagonist's journey, an introduction to character-driven screenwriting and storytelling, a #1 bestseller on Amazon. You've written 4 years. You've run a very successful screenwriting blog, and then you decide to write a book about screenwriting. So I'm going to ask you the question that every screenwriter gets asked in a pitch meeting. Scott, why now?
Yeah, why now? I had no intention of writing the book,
Mhm.
none. There's so many books. I mean, you go into Barnes and Nobles or wherever, and it's like there's this whole slew of these how-to books.
Mhm.
Um, but then I got connected with this London-based publishing company. They've been around since the 1850s, Palgrave Macmillan. And they started talking to me and asked me, they said, Scott, why don't you go and look at what textbooks they're using in film schools?
Mhm.
And so I did. And no knock against some of these books, but I saw a complete dearth, I guess that's the word, of work on character. It's like all plot, 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 plot. This needs
Mhm.
to happen on that page, all that sort of thing. No knock on that. I mean, a screenplay fundamentally is, that's it is plot. It is, but that's not the totality of story structure.
Mhm.
The plot is just the events that happen. What goes on underneath. Every moment there's something else going on underneath. And for me, it's not only about just trying to uh, get people to write from a place where they're focusing on character, but that's where the storytelling should start. There's this idea. I call it the protagonist journey. Obviously, it's an homage to the hero's journey. I studied Joseph Campbell back when I was in college in 1973, the Paleolithic era or whatever. So I've been a huge fan of Joseph Campbell ever since. But the idea that the story begins with the characters and that the protagonist, the journey they go on is the journey they need to go on.
Mhm.
That's like Campbell, that's like a direct quote. The journey they take is the journey the hero needs to take. And so that's how, anyhow, I went back to Palgrave Macmillan and I said, no, there's no books out there that I could tell that are really focusing on character driven storytelling. So that
Mhm.
led to that. Why now? Because There's just like literally nothing out there. And you're talking about film schools and people going off and, having a leg up in the film and TV business. Somebody's got to be, promoting that, it seems to me. So that's why I wrote the book.
Your mantra that you say in the book a few times is start with character, end with character, find the story in between, which is something that, when I read a lot of scripts these days, again, not knocking any particular books or philosophies of screenwriting, I think it can become very apparent when someone is just kind of checked kind of the boxes of like, this should happen by this page, this should happen this page, and character, and people are writing more with their heads of like, this is exactly how a script should look, to they're missing the character and the heart sometimes. There's a quote that I do want to, if you don't mind me reading a quote from the book. I need to find it. Here we go. When we start our journey into a story universe, we should carry little in the way of preconceptions about events and arcs. Our focus should be on immersing ourselves in the lives of the characters, let them drive the story crafting process. And that's something that I really related to, because it's like something that I've struggled with when I've been trying to do an outline or focus on plot. I can't find it because I don't know who the characters are, and it's just really hard for me. So I usually find it by writing. I guess that, I mean, and seeing those in those, and I see scripts like this that have that problem, and I see that a lot. Do you think, again, not knocking anything in particular, that these structural guides have had maybe a negative effect on upcoming writers that you're teaching, or even on modern film and TV?
Yeah, you raise a really important question. I understand the mentality. I get it, why people would want to simplify the process. There's a structure to the plot, and if we can fill in these blanks, then that's screenwriting, because it avoids a lot of the messiness, frankly, that exists when you do immerse yourself in the lives of your characters. Characters, like us, like people, individuals, are complex figures. And so it's a messy process. Some of them may not want to talk to you. Some of them may tell you lies when you get to know them. But so I understand the idea of simplifying. And I have to say, whatever the intention of the writers are, some of these books have had, in my view, a detrimental impact on the perception of screenwriting. Like, you can reduce it to these, X amount of story beats and whatnot. And that, frankly, I hear this from my screenwriter friends who are actively working in Hollywood now. They'll often get these notes that, like, a development executive who's a Stanford MBA and has no background in creative writing has read one book, a how-to book, and they're saying, well, no, your act one end is on 31, it's got to be on 25. So I do think it has had a negative effect. Most important thing about it is, you mentioned it, feelings. I think that when you talk to development executive managers and agents, they want to feel something when they read new material. They want to have an emotional experience. And so if you're staying up top all the time and just working on the plot, figuring out these events, that's just not going to get it. That's just to me, the path toward formulaic writing. If, on the other hand, you do get to know your characters and you spend a significant amount of time living with them, not even thinking about plot, you're just getting to know them through a set of exercises and interviews and whatnot, that the plot will emerge from there. And moreover, the characters are going to be these richly multifaceted, defined characters that actors are going to want to play. The people, when they read the material, go, I really feel something. Remember there's that great TED talk that Andrew Stanton did, which if only there were a blog that transcribed it for a 10-part series, right? Because he said that the number one mantra that we should have in mind as storytellers is to make me care, not make Andrew Stanton care, but make the audience care, make the reader care. And how do you do that? I tell my students, care character. That's where the actors are going to make you care, because they're playing a character, care actor, right? So there's no downside, none, zero, to spending time with your characters and getting to know them in a really intense and immersive way. All that's going to do is enable you to create these multifaceted, complex figures, but also it's going to drive the plot, because in my view, the journey the protagonist takes is a journey they need to take, which is directly tied to their plot line experience. So the A story.
Right. You that is definitely a Joseph Campbell thing, but it's also, you cite a lot in this book somebody that I maybe didn't expect to see in a storytelling book. You quote a lot from Carl Jung. And in my worry would be like, oh man, this is gonna be like, I can't understand Carl. I can't understand. I'm not gonna understand this. But you kind of boil it down in a way that makes a lot of sense, and it's such a simple concept, but one that applies screenwriting so well. Is you talk about how basically what a plot is you've created this character and their conflicts, and it is making the conflicts in their internal conflicts into external conflicts. So I would love to, if you could like maybe wax a little bit on how you found these Jungian philosophies and incorporated them into your screenwriting teaching and philosophies.
He is, in my view, the ultimate screenwriting guru. It's Carl Jung. I don't know whether his theories work like in real life, but sure. When I was reading him, I didn't learn about him until I went to Yale graduate school. I didn't know that Joseph Campbell was hugely influenced by Carl Jung. In fact, Campbell edited a volume of Carl Jung's writings. But then when you read Carl Jung, you realize, oh, this is where the hero's journey came from, man. There's a quote, I remember reading it like 2 decades ago, or even longer than that. I'm reading this thing. It's a comment that an observation Jung makes. And here's a direct quote. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Now, he's talking about real life. Like when we have a circumstance, he goes on to talk about when we remain undivided and we're not dealing with our stuff inside, these dynamics, we're avoiding them, including the shadow, which is the dark negative impulses, that the universe is going to create circumstances which force us to. And I read that and I was like, that's the protagonist's journey. That's totally the protagonist's journey.
Sure.
The protagonist starts off the story, like Joseph Campbell says, they're just making do. They need to change, right? And so now you think, here they are with their psychological state at the beginning. What Jung is talking about is saying that actually is precipitating the universe to step in and say, you think you're living your life the way you're supposed to be living. Nope. Boom. Plot point. Inciting incident, call to adventure. You have to change. And that's the nature of that journey. Now, that want and need language, I didn't come up with it. That's been around forever.
Sure. But
this idea of, like, by the end of Act 1, the want is now the conscious goal. What are they consciously attempting to do? They're going to save the girl. They're going to defeat the bad guy or whatever. There's the need, the unconscious goal. That's the real reason why the story exists, is that they have to get in touch with this thing that's inside. They've been repressing it, suppressing it, avoiding it, whatever. It's inside them already. Carl Jung says, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you are. It's already there. Metamorphoses, Ovid, when he wrote Metamorphoses, the seeds of change lie within. It's already there. Joseph Campbell says the hero's journey is not a journey of attainment, but a journey of reattainment, reconnection. So the classic example is Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. At the very end, Glinda says to her, Dorothy, you've always had the power to go home. Well, why did she have to go on their journey? Well, she wouldn't have known that otherwise. So that's the hero's journey. That's what Carl Jung's talking about. Each of us, his process is called individuation. That's our task in life, is to get in touch with all aspects of ourself. Our associations, our memories, our influences, our instincts, our taboos, all that stuff that makes it. Well, you can totally transplant that to working as a writer with your characters, and in particular your protagonist. And if you can keep drilling down and find that deepest need, that what is that unconscious goal, that drives everything. All the characters that the protagonist intersects with, they serve that story. Every event that happens, all the plotline points are all forcing the protagonist to change, to get out of their old ways of being, discover this thing that's going to energize and move them toward their new self. So that's my little sermon. Sorry if I went off a little long there, Brian,
No,
but
I
you
love
can
it.
tell I'm pretty passionate about it.
I can tell, and I love it. And in the book, there are a ton of great exercises that turn, this philosophical thought into action. These um, that you're laying out the characters' want, their need, how the characters serve that story, how to start breaking that story. And it's a book that I honestly wish I would have read sooner. It is not just theory. You find a way to make this theory practical. How did you land on the exercises, on the methods to tap into this and actually practice them?
Okay, well, that's a great question. So much akin to like when Palgrave Macmillan said, why don't you look at what film schools are using as textbooks? And I was like, there's nobody doing anything about character. Well, back when I started Screenwriting Masterclass, which is my online educational resource back in 2010, and I launched it with Tom Benedict, who's like the first screenwriter I met in Hollywood. He wrote Cocoon. He's written dozens of projects, knows like he's worked with just, every great producer and director in town. The very, very first class I created was a class called Prep, from concept to outline, because I didn't see anybody out there dealing with this critical thing of breaking story, which is like, that's most of the grunt work, right? Is breaking the story. So it was a 6-week workshop. I've road tested that workshop now with over 1,000 students. And so those questions, those exercises have developed out of doing that over the years. And there's 6 of these. There's others you can do, but there's 6 of them. And I divide them into 2 parts. One I call indirect engagement exercises, and the other is direct engagement exercises. So the indirect engagement exercises are where we're thinking about the character. So there's a distance where we're observing them. And so these are not my ideas, but a questionnaire. I mean, there's just, the half dozen or more questionnaires that float around online. Biography, I do a little bit different there. Like, you ask these questions like, who are they? Why are they? How are they? Where are they? All of those things, you spend time thinking about that. The third one is a free scene. Now you're starting to move closer to the character. You're just putting that character in a scene with another character, and you're just blurting that out. But that's more about us at a distance where we're thinking about the character. It's the direct engagement exercises where you really find the diamonds. And so the next step in is what I call the interview. And that's where, you're a journalist and interviewing someone, or you're an employer and they're an employee coming in. Imagine putting the character in that position. My favorite one is, I'm a psychiatrist, they're my patient. And I learned this trick when I was at Yale, because I got a master's of divinity degree. I had to take a certain amount of courses that involve like counseling. And this is a counseling technique. You ask questions, whatever their answer is, you rephrase it as a question. So all you're doing is just putting it back. You're acknowledging that you hear them, but then you're using that question to keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And so you're literally doing a IU thing. You're typing it out or handwriting it. Like, what is that conversation? What is that 45-minute session going to be like? And again, some of the characters may not want to talk to you. You may have to go back and do this 3 or 4 times. At some point, you can say, you know what? I just went to the municipal court. You are now mandated to answer these questions, or we're going to be here forever. And so you can kind of put that pressure on them, right? But then they start to talk. By the way, this is a great way for you to start to hear their dialogue.
Absolutely.
Their speech patterns. And then the next one is more of the real meditative type of experience. It's like, I tell students, it's like the Vulcan mind meld, where you're getting in their head and they're getting in your head. You shut the door, you turn off your phone, you get in front of the thing, you do some deep breathing, you get the character in your mind. And you're just like, okay, for 15 minutes, I'm going to blind type. You close your eyes and you put your fingers on the keyboard and off you go. And you just type. And it's going to be like meditation. There'll be times where, I got to walk the dog, I have to do my taxes. You just let it go, right? But boom, 15 minutes later, the bell goes off. You look at what you've got. 80% of it may be gobbledygook. You have no point of it. But then all of a sudden, they're like, there's a car hanging off the side of a bridge on a rain-slick night. Wow, that's so specific. Where'd that come from? There's a birthday cake that's smashed on the floor of a kitchen. So you start to, then you go back and do interviews with the character. Does this thing mean anything to you about a car that's in a rain-slicked road? You start to unpack this stuff. This is all obviously, we're acting on faith. This is the magic of writing, where we believe the characters exist because they do in their own story universe.
Right.
And that if you if you reach out to them, you open your hands and say, I am here. I want to know. I believe you want me to tell your story. You do these exercises like the stream of consciousness or the monologue, those last one I was just talking about. That's you start churning up all the stuff and you start finding all this amazing things. I tell my students one last thing. I tell my students, I say, look, when you're going through this content, you create a master brainstorming list. You put everything you discover during these character interactions into this master brainstorming list. Don't pre-edit. Don't throw anything away. Imagine if the screenwriter for Citizen Kane had said, "Snow globe, that's stupid." No, you got to keep it all there because you just never know how it's going to come in handy. But yes, these exercises. Then there's a process whereby that's receptive writing, where you're just like living with the characters. But then you step outside the story universe and you start looking at connections and moments, and you start to see scenes and plots, character archetypes. You see these relationships, the subplot relationships, and so you go back and forth between the receptive and executive writing, and eventually you end up with an outline. But you got to start with the characters. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. One thing you do in the book, you mentioned it earlier. There are, what you said, over 300 examples of movies and TV shows that you're citing.
Yes.
You read some of these books and you'll see the same scripts over and over again. They're obviously great, well-structured, really great movies to see. Midnight Run, Back to the Future, movies that you always see in these books, but you're citing things I haven't seen a ton of being cited. Things like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Finding Nemo, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. How did you land on what movies you were and shows that you wanted to pick and cite, and what lessons you wanted to pull from them?
Well, three things. One, I wanted to make sure to include TV. I haven't read hardly any of these how-to books. I read Sid Field's book, Screenplay Foundations of Screenwriting, but you hanging around the screenwriting universe, you hear things and whatnot, and I talk to people. But I understand that most of them focus on movies and not TV. Well, so I spent a lot of time focusing on TV there, particularly series like limited series or series that have, like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend was great because over the course of 4 seasons, she literally goes through the exact arc that I talk about: disunity, deconstruction, reconstruction, unity. Like each season aligns exactly with that. It was so perfect. So there's one thing. I wanted to include TV. Two, it was very important for me to include contemporary titles because I work with college and graduate students and they get to sign this material and they're like, I know Casablanca is supposed to be good, but come on, man, it's like, black and white. What about, so I've gotten letters from students in college programs saying, thank you for including material like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Moonlight, that are contemporary titles that they can relate to because they've seen it, right? So that was a second consideration. The third consideration was I wanted to include titles that had female-centric leads, that had people of color, that had a rich diversity of ethnic and socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds, because I firmly believe now more than ever, we need great storytellers to tell stories of the wide variety of human experience, to put a face on the other over and over again so that we can try, hopefully, to develop and engender some sense of empathy for people. Not the least of which the stories are interesting. They're fascinating.
Yeah.
Those were three considerations I had. That's a very conscious effort on my part in terms of those titles.
As a screenwriting teacher and author of the screenwriting book, what is the perfect script? The one script that you would point to and say, this can't be any better. And is it mine?
In the end, what a great script. Well, I was going to ask you, what's going on with that? Before I answer, what's going on with that project? I love that script. That's great.
Thank you. I wasn't trying to fish, but I'll take that. I can tell you more off mic. I can say that it has been optioned by a great production company who are wonderful. There's a great director attached to it who's working on something else right now. I'm hoping it's their next feature, but it's like everything else in this industry. Everything takes longer than you think it will. But I'm very excited. I'm very hopeful. I would love to tell you more, but we'll have to do that, not for public consumption. Yeah.
Okay. No, it's a terrific script, and it is the protagonist's journey. I mean, you do see most of that stuff is just instinctual, Brian, don't you think? I mean, everybody's heard, seen, read thousands and thousands of stories. What
Mhm.
I'm saying is not like, oh my God, revolutionary, but the idea that a character starts off in a state of disconnection from who they're supposed to be. And this is, by the way, the number one narrative archetype, I think. I call it the unity arc, where they move from
Mhm.
disunity to unity. Well, they're not just going to jump there. They got to go through a process of disconnecting themselves or disassembling their old ways of being. That's the
Mhm.
first half of Act Two, generally. The second half of Act Two is now they're reconnecting with it and they're evolving in a positive way. So it's just sort of logical, really.
Mhm.
But perfect script, I'll okay, three. Okay, I'll
Okay,
give you
please.
three. Well, and well, the number one thing is The Apartment. That's absolutely my favorite movie of
Oh,
all
great
time.
movie. Great
And,
movie.
and it has to be up there because that could have failed so badly. The
Mhm.
the the tone of that thing is pitch perfect.
Mhm.
It's just incredible. But more contemporary scripts, I'd say Little Miss Sunshine is
Mhm.
just a wonderful script. It's really an interest. I give it to my students. I say because it's interesting because really there are three protagonists in that story. The central character is Olive. She doesn't really change. These
Mhm.
three other characters, Wayne, Frank, and Richard, they do change.
Mhm.
And so that's an interesting story. Very, very well constructed story, well written. It's just lovely. Michael Clayton, like
Ah,
Tony Gilroy,
yeah,
is just
yeah.
a masterpiece. To me, when I broke in, it was like Chinatown. Everybody said Chinatown's the perfect script. I think Michael Clayton is probably, you know. And then I have to do something from Pixar because I love Pixar. Up,
Mhm.
Up is
Mhm.
just a phenomenal story that just hits these emotional marks. Just it's great. So, but those are all great examples of
That's a
stellar.
very, very solid list. If there were one big takeaway that you would want readers to take away from Protagonist Journey, what would it be?
Well, you mentioned that mantra: begin with character, end with character, find the story in between. I mean, to really just embrace that.
Mhm.
I mean, just to trust that if you reach out to your characters and you immerse yourself in their lives, I use that verb intentionally. I mean, really go into their lives and live with them and allow them the freedom to speak and feel and think, and you engage them and you give yourself over to that process for, at least a few weeks, that the story is going to start to emerge. Again, this goes back to that Jungian notion. When the inner
Mhm.
situation is that conflict is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. So there's a synergy between what's going on in the inner life of the character and what happens in the plot. And
Mhm.
so that's absolutely the most important thing to me is that, if people would just start focusing on character and trusting that they're going to get to the plot, it's not going to be far removed from Aristotle. There's
Mhm.
going to be a beginning, middle, and an end. The page counts may not hit exactly where some of the how-to books say, but if you get us to care about those characters,
Mhm.
that's make me care, like Andrew Stanton said. So
Yeah.
that would be my number one key. Yeah.
The book is clearly resonating with a ton of people. It was number one bestseller on Amazon, like I mentioned, and the blurbs praising this book from Kristen Kiwi Smith, Lisa Joy, Shane Salerno, Brad Inglesby, Scott Beck and Brian Wood, Stephanie Polson, Peter Craig, David Rabinowitz, so on and on and on. How does it feel to have a book that's been received so well by writers at every level, both starting out and who are doing the damn thing?
Uh, well, I'm honored, obviously, but they're just responding, I think, to the fact that somebody's saying something that needs to be said, which is that they live with these characters and work with these characters, and they hear this conversation all the time. If you're writing in TV, it's all character. I mean, you can't say, you may spend 5 minutes talking about your pilot script and your pitch deck and whatnot, but the executive is going to say, all right, why season two? Tell me what episode 304 is going to be. And so now that's all about the character and their evolution. Are you watching Ted Lasso at all? Are you
Ted
seen Ted
Lasso
Lasso?
is maybe my favorite show right now. I adore it.
Okay, so there's a perfect example there. Remember little Nate in season one?
Hmm.
Nate was this little secret, quiet little dude, but he served as a mentor character for Ted because Ted knew nothing about English football. And
Hmm.
Nate actually is a student of the game and studies, football theory and whatnot. And so he was helping Ted along. Season 2, he switches archetypes. He starts to get jealous of Ted because Ted's getting all the notoriety when actually it's Nate's ideas that are helping the team, go along. He's like become the wunderkind and all this stuff. He's getting angrier and angrier. There's a whole father story where that he's like his father just just doesn't like him, not doesn't like him, but disapproves of it. He can never satisfy his father. So there's a father-son thing going on between he and Ted. Season 2, he becomes a trickster. He starts planting stories with the tabloids and whatnot, which leads to the end of season 2. The very last image, he's become the manager of a rival club.
Right.
And now he's going to be in season 3, a nemesis character. So that's what I'm talking about. You need to like live with the character so you can see the richness and complexity, and you could exploit that from season to season. So I don't know where we started with this, but again, character.
So many writers have so much respect for you, the way you teach, the way you approach story and character. Is this a position that you saw yourself finding yourself in at this point in your career or life, or ever in your writing journey?
Well, actually, I don't know if you know this, but I went to the University of Virginia undergraduate, and I majored in religious studies. My family was very religious, and I was always interested in the big questions of life. And so I majored in religious studies and then went to Yale Divinity School, got a 3-year Master's of Divinity degree. I was going to get a PhD. I was really fascinated by how it went from this social justice warrior preaching the apocalypse and basically socialism to church, what we call primitive Christianity, that first century or so. That was I was going to become an academic. I was going to teach. I was going to get a PhD, but my parents on my 14th birthday got me a guitar, much to their chagrin, because I started to write songs and became, the folk era. So I knew that if I didn't like pursue, see, this is young. When I drive up to Yale Divinity School, I get this feeling in my gut. I'm not supposed to be here. There's something else I'm supposed to be doing. Become who you are. I had to follow that creative instinct. I knew if I didn't do that, I would be I'd probably be a very successful academic, but I would not be satisfied. So I took a year off, and that became the rest of my life. And so, but I did have that teaching instinct from early on. It was in a completely different field. It was, early Christian studies.
Yeah.
So now I'm back in academics now since 2016. I'm like literally an assistant professor. This is my tenure year. I'll find out if I get tenure at the end of the year. I assume
I'm rooting for you. I hope so. You deserve it. What would you say? We don't have we have about 3 minutes left. So before we go into any more questions, I do want to go ahead and say I want to give you this opportunity to plug the book, plug the website, plug where people can follow you, whatever you want to plug. I'm going to give you the stage.
Okay. Okay. So there's the book, The Protagonist Journey, an introduction to character-driven screenwriting and storytelling, right there. That's like the Carol Merrill thing from one of those game shows from back then. So yeah, the book. I encourage people to read it. I'm humbly say that it's actually quite good. I mean, I'm not a very
I would agree.
type. So there's that. There's my website, my blog. Go into the story. It's been around for now. Will be 15 years in May.
Oh, wow.
It's the official screenwriting blog of the Blacklist. It's got thousands of free articles. I started it as an educational thing to like try and create opportunities, free resources for people. So there's that. Screenwritingmasterclass.com is my online educational resource. Twitter. I'm still on Twitter until what's his face decides he's going to blow it up or whatnot.
Me too.
Go into the story.
I can't get off of it.
So that's basically it. Occasionally, I get up on the roof and I have semaphores, so you can look for those here in Chicago. So I don't know. I said that, but
so between the book, between the teaching, do you have any stories of people you've mentored who maybe are success stories or proudest moments of your career to this point?
Well, the only screenwriting classes Lisa Joy took were with me. So there's that. She would tell me, well, yeah, my boyfriend was reading your notes and said they were really good. And I'm like, okay, I had no idea. Well, it's Joan and Nolan. So, so there's that. But no, I have tons of students that I've taught at DePaul and elsewhere that have gone on to do things. I just was interacting with someone who's in the UK. She literally did an MFA at DePaul. and was because her husband couldn't get a green card here or whatnot. She had to go to the UK. What am I going to do? So I got in touch with some people. She now works as a development executive in London,
Oh, wow.
So I love, and then I get emails from people, because of the blog. Scott, thank you so much. I made the nickel. I won the nickel, or I won this contest. So it's just gratifying. Again, I just want great storytellers, great stories, and that's when that happens, it's great.
What do you think happens after you die?
I don't believe in an afterlife. I really don't. I think we need to do it here. So
your meeting has ended. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to 39-Minute Conversations, hosted and produced by Brian T. Arnold. Music by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and tune in for new episodes, and don't forget to rate and review. If you didn't like what you heard, please don't do any of that. That's okay too. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe and be well.